He wasn't just a thief. He was an artist of death. To the rich, he was a charming stranger with a dazzling smile and flawless taste in luxury. To his victims, he was the last face they ever saw. They called him the Rolex killer, a man who turned elegance into execution. His crimes began quietly, in the glittering streets of Europe, where the wealthy wore their pride on their wrists. But what started as theft quickly spiraled into a trail of cold, calculated murders that baffled even the most experienced investigators. Interpol labeled him one of the most dangerous men alive, a ghost who moved through countries without leaving a trace, except for one chilling pattern: the missing Rolex. Every victim, every crime scene, every clue pointed to a man who saw time not as a measure of life, but as something to steal. For years, he stayed one step ahead of justice, playing a deadly game with the world's top investigators. But every clock eventually stops ticking, and his time was running out. This is the shocking true story of how one man turned luxury into murder, and how Interpol's greatest manhunt finally exposed the ruthless Rolex killer. In the dazzling world of wealth and luxury, where diamonds sparkle and time is measured by gold, a silent predator was hiding in plain sight. He blended in perfectly: tailored suits, expensive cologne, and a voice that could charm anyone into trust. No one suspected that behind the polished image lived a cold-blooded killer. His name would soon echo across continents: the Rolex killer. It began with disappearances that seemed random. Wealthy businessmen found dead in their hotel rooms, wrists bare, watches missing. At first, police believed it was simple robbery. But as the bodies piled up from Paris to Monaco, and from Geneva to Dubai, the truth became undeniable. This was no ordinary thief. This was a man obsessed, a hunter who killed not for money, but for the thrill of control. Interpol stepped in when the pattern became too precise to ignore. The killer left no fingerprints, no witnesses, only his signature: the absence of a Rolex. He was elegant, patient, and deadly efficient, always striking before slipping into another country under a new identity. Every move was calculated, every kill symbolic. But as his fame grew, so did his arrogance. The Rolex killer began to play with investigators, sending cryptic messages and daring them to catch him. What followed was one of the most intense international manhunts in modern history, a deadly chase between brilliance and madness. This is the story of a man who mastered deception, lived among the elite, and used time itself as his weapon. And it's the untold truth of how Interpol's relentless pursuit exposed the dark heart of a killer who believed he was untouchable. Long before the world knew him as the Rolex killer, he was just a man named Adrian Voss, a name that, in the beginning, meant nothing. Born in Geneva, Switzerland, Adrian grew up surrounded by wealth, but never by love. His father, a renowned watch dealer, was cold and distant, more concerned with business than family. His mother left when he was a child, leaving Adrian with only his father's harsh lessons and a deep sense of inferiority. From a young age, he was drawn to the world of fine watches, not because he appreciated their craftsmanship, but because they represented everything he wanted: status, power, and admiration. Adrian learned early that the world respected those who had something rare, something others couldn't afford. He watched how people's eyes lit up when his father showed them a gold Rolex or a diamond-studded Patek Philippe. Those watches weren't just accessories, they were trophies, symbols of control and success. And control was something Adrian craved. As a teenager, he became obsessed with timepieces. He memorized models, designs, and histories, but his fascination soon turned darker. He didn't just want to own a Rolex, he wanted to earn it by taking it from someone else. He saw every tick of the second hand as a reminder that time belonged to those strong enough to take it. After his father's death, Adrian inherited nothing. His father's business went to a trusted partner, leaving him bitter and desperate. He left Geneva, drifting through Europe, living off scams and charm. He discovered he had a talent for deception. He could walk into any high-end store and convince anyone that he belonged there. His perfect posture, calm voice, and designer clothes were his weapons. People believed him because he looked the part. In Paris, his life of crime truly began. He started small, posing as a luxury buyer, swapping fake watches for real ones, and disappearing before anyone noticed. But his ambition grew. He began targeting wealthy collectors, arranging private meetings to purchase rare pieces, and vanishing with their prized possessions. His operations were smooth, calculated, and without emotion. He enjoyed the chase, the planning, the feeling of control over others. Then, one night, everything changed. Adrian arranged a meeting with a French businessman who had discovered one of his scams. When the man confronted him and threatened to expose his fraud, Adrian snapped. In a moment of pure rage, he struck the man repeatedly until he stopped moving. As silence filled the room, Adrian's eyes landed on the man's wrist. A gold Rolex submariner gleamed under the light. Almost instinctively, he removed it, staring at the watch as if hypnotized. The smooth tick of the second hand calmed him. It was as if the watch itself had rewarded him for taking control. That moment awakened something inside him. The thrill of power. The silence after violence. It felt intoxicating. He didn't feel guilt. He felt satisfaction. And so began the pattern that would make him infamous. Each time he killed, he took a Rolex as a trophy, not to sell but to keep, a reminder of his dominance. In the following months, similar murders began appearing across Europe. Wealthy men found dead, their luxury watches missing. Authorities initially suspected organized robbery, but the killings were too methodical, too personal. It was as if the murderer wasn't after money, but something deeper. Interpol analysts would later call Adrian's early crimes the birth of a signature. The brutality wasn't random, it was symbolic. Every victim was successful, powerful, admired. Everything Adrian believed he was denied. By taking their watches, he was taking their time, their status, their essence. He became addicted to the ritual. The click of the clasp, the ticking sound, the reflection of gold in the dark. It became his private religion. Adrian Voss had transformed into something far more dangerous than a thief. He was now a predator, disguised as a gentleman, moving freely through Europe's most elite circles. And as the killings continued, one question began to haunt investigators across the continent. Who was this man who turned time itself into a weapon? By the time Adrian Voss adopted the alias Luca Devereaux, he was no longer a petty thief or impulsive killer. He was a master manipulator who had perfected his craft. His transformation was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly effective. Under his new identity, he became a familiar face among Europe's elite social circles. He attended private auctions, high-end watch conventions, and exclusive yacht parties. To the world, he was a wealthy investor and philanthropist with impeccable taste. To Interpol, though they didn't know it yet, he was a ghost leaving a trail of bodies behind him. His charm was his greatest weapon. Adrian could make anyone trust him within minutes. He listened carefully, remembered details, and always made people feel important. That's how he chose his victims. Men who wore arrogance like a suit, showing off their luxury as if it made them immortal. Those were the ones he wanted to destroy. To him, each kill wasn't about greed but domination. He wanted to prove that power and beauty could be stripped away in seconds, just like time itself. Adrian's killings followed a chilling pattern. He would meet his targets at social gatherings, study their habits, and strike when they least expected it. Some were poisoned with a rare toxin that left almost no trace. Others were found dead in hotel rooms, their deaths ruled as accidents or heart attacks. In every case, their Rolex watches vanished. The authorities in each country failed to connect the dots, believing they were dealing with separate crimes. But Adrian was careful. He always moved on before suspicions arose, crossing borders using fake passports and identities. The first time his crimes drew international attention was after the murder of a Spanish billionaire in Madrid. The man was found dead in his penthouse suite, his safe untouched, yet his watch collection was gone. Among the missing pieces was a one-of-a-kind Rolex Cosmograph Daytona, valued at over $500,000. The media exploded with coverage, calling it the luxury murder. When another similar case occurred just weeks later in Monaco, investigators began to suspect a serial killer targeting the wealthy. That's when the name the Rolex Killer first appeared in headlines. Adrian didn't hide from the nickname. He embraced it. He read every article, collected newspaper clippings, and smiled at how the world unknowingly celebrated his work. He felt invincible. The name gave him an identity larger than life, something he had always craved. He began sending cryptic letters to local authorities, mocking their failures. One message read, "Time doesn't kill, you do, when you waste it." It was a taunt and a signature rolled into one. Interpol finally stepped in after linking 7 unsolved murders across France, Spain, Italy, and Switzerland. Each victim had last been seen with a mysterious man matching Adrian's description, though no photograph or fingerprint could be traced. He was everywhere and nowhere. Interpol agents created a task force named Operation Time Trap, but Adrian continued to stay ahead of them. He had a rule: never stay longer than a week in the same city, never use the same alias twice, and never kill unless it was worth it. But as the years passed, his obsession deepened. Killing was no longer just about control. It became a form of expression. He treated every crime like a performance, carefully staging each scene with elegance and precision. His victims were his canvas, and their watches were his trophies. Despite his growing notoriety, Adrian's arrogance made him careless. Surveillance cameras caught glimpses of him leaving crime scenes, always dressed immaculately, always calm. Investigators began building a psychological profile, a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies and a need for validation. He wasn't just killing for pleasure, he was killing for recognition. By 2018, the Rolex Killer had taken at least 17 lives across 5 countries. The public was terrified. Luxury watch sales plummeted, and collectors began hiding their prized possessions. But Adrian loved the panic. To him, fear was proof of power. The louder the world screamed his name, the more untouchable he felt. He believed time was his ally, and as long as he kept moving, no one could ever catch him. But the clock was already ticking toward his downfall. Interpol had finally declared him their top priority. The man they called the Rolex Killer was no longer just a ghost story whispered between detectives. He was the most wanted man in Europe. Operation Time Trap was born, a multinational task force involving agents from 5 countries dedicated to tracking down the elusive killer who had turned luxury into death. Leading the team was Agent Sophia Klein, a woman whose calm intensity matched Adrian Voss's own. She didn't see him as just another criminal. She saw him as a psychological puzzle, a man whose obsession with time could be his undoing. The investigation began with chaos. Interpol had evidence from over a dozen crime scenes, but no clear identity. Each country had different aliases, fake passports, and conflicting witness reports. Sometimes he was tall and clean-shaven, other times rugged with a beard. His disguises were flawless, and his charm made people forget him the moment he left. Yet Sophia noticed something subtle. The pattern of his killings matched the schedule of luxury watch expos and international auctions. Every murder happened within a week of such events. Interpol began cross-referencing flight records, surveillance footage, and auction guest lists. In each city, one name kept appearing: Luca Devereaux. He was always in the right place, at the right time, often pictured in the background of photographs with the very people who later became victims. The task force realized they were dealing with a man who lived among his targets, studied them, and struck with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Adrian had no idea how close they were. Living under yet another alias, he was planning his next kill in Geneva. His target, a renowned collector who owned a platinum Rolex Daytona worth millions. Adrian had already befriended him at a private dinner, gaining access to his inner circle. But that same night, Interpol intercepted a bank transaction linked to one of Adrian's shell companies. The trail led straight to Switzerland. Geneva police were alerted, and a surveillance operation was launched around the collector's home. For days, agents waited for a move, but Adrian was too clever. He noticed a strange car outside, a reflection in a window that wasn't there before. Realizing he was being watched, he vanished again, leaving behind a lifeless body and an empty wrist. He had killed again, right under Interpol's nose. The international pressure mounted. Politicians demanded results, and luxury brands privately funded the hunt, desperate to distance themselves from the horror. Sophia Klein refused to give up. She spent sleepless nights studying Adrian's journal entries recovered from one of his abandoned apartments. He had written, "They chase time. I own it." That sentence became her key insight. Sophia theorized that Adrian's next strike would occur at one of the largest luxury expos in Europe, the Milan Watch Exhibition. It was scheduled for the following month, and thousands of collectors from around the world would attend. The task force set up a massive undercover operation. Agents posed as investors, journalists, and dealers, scanning every face in the crowd. On the second day of the event, security cameras captured a man fitting Adrian's description entering the exhibition hall. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and sunglasses, he blended in perfectly among the elite. He moved from booth to booth, speaking casually, smiling often, never staying too long. But then, he stopped at a display of limited edition Rolexes, and for the first time, the cameras caught a clear glimpse of his face. Sophia's heart raced as the alert went out. "We have visual confirmation. The Rolex killer is here." The trap was set. Interpol had finally cornered the man who believed he could outrun time itself, but Adrian Voss had survived too long to go down easily. As the walls closed in, he was already planning his next move, and this time he was ready to fight his way out. The moment Adrian Voss stepped into the Milan Watch Exhibition, he believed he was untouchable. The hall glimmered with wealth, glass cases filled with gold, collectors flaunting their luxury, and security guards who didn't realize the world's most wanted man was walking right past them. He felt alive again, surrounded by everything he loved: power, vanity, and the ticking rhythm of time. What he didn't know was that Interpol had transformed the entire event into a trap designed just for him. Agent Sophia Klein watched him from across the hall, disguised as a journalist. She had studied him for years, memorized every possible behavior, every detail of his methods. Now, seeing him in person for the first time, she felt both fear and fascination. He was exactly as the files described, calm, graceful, and radiating confidence. But behind his eyes, she saw something else: the thrill of control. Interpol's undercover team had surrounded the building. Every exit was monitored, every camera was live. The plan was simple: wait until Adrian made contact with his next target, then close in. But Adrian was unpredictable. He had a predator's instinct, and somehow he sensed that something wasn't right. As he mingled through the crowd, smiling and shaking hands, his sharp eyes caught a reflection in a showcase, a man wearing an earpiece, watching him too closely. He turned, smiled faintly, and walked away from his intended victim. Within seconds, he shifted direction toward the emergency exit. Sophia saw it and gave the command. "He knows! Move in!" Chaos erupted. Agents rushed through the crowd as Adrian sprinted through the side corridors, knocking over displays and scattering terrified guests. The sound of alarms filled the air. He pushed through a service door and ran into the street, disappearing into a maze of alleys. Outside, Milan turned into a battleground. Dozens of officers spread out while Sophia chased him through the narrow lanes. Adrian hijacked a taxi, forcing the driver out and speeding through traffic, ignoring red lights and screeching tires. Sirens wailed behind him, helicopters hovered above, and the chase stretched deep into the city. Finally, his luck ran out. At a tunnel intersection, a barricade blocked his path. He swerved to avoid it, crashing the car into a concrete wall. Dazed and bleeding, Adrian stumbled out, clutching his side but still refusing to surrender. He staggered into the tunnel, limping through the shadows, only to find Interpol waiting at the other end. Sophia stepped forward, gun raised. "It's over, Adrian," she said, her voice steady but sharp. He looked at her with a faint smile, blood trickling from his lip. "You're late," he muttered, the same words he had once written in his letters to the press. With nowhere left to run, Adrian finally dropped to his knees as agents surrounded him. The world's most wanted killer, the man who had taunted Interpol for years, was finally in custody. News of his arrest spread within hours. Headlines across the globe celebrated the fall of the Rolex killer. Luxury watch brands breathed a sigh of relief, and the public praised Interpol's relentless pursuit. But for Sophia, the victory felt hollow. In interrogation, Adrian refused to confess. He smiled through every question, answering only once with chilling calmness. "You don't catch time, you borrow it." As he was led away in handcuffs, the ticking sound of his watch echoed through the interrogation room, a final reminder that for Adrian Voss, time had always been both his weapon and his obsession. Yet even behind bars, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this man's story wasn't finished. The world thought it was over. Headlines screamed, "Rolex killer captured." Documentaries aired his story, and Interpol declared victory. For a moment, it seemed that the nightmare had finally ended. But behind the heavily guarded walls of a high-security prison in Switzerland, Adrian Voss, the Rolex killer, was already crafting his next move. At first, he appeared cooperative. He answered questions politely, followed prison routines, and even requested access to books on horology, the science of timekeeping. The guards, trained to deal with dangerous criminals, believed he had finally accepted defeat. But Adrian wasn't a man who surrendered easily. Every day, he studied the guards' schedules, the timing of the surveillance shifts, even the subtle hum of the generators that powered the electric locks. To him, prison wasn't punishment. It was another puzzle to solve. Agent Sophia Klein visited him weekly, determined to understand his psychology. "Why the watches?" she asked one day. Adrian smiled faintly. "Because time never lies. People do." She could sense his mind still working, still scheming. She warned her superiors that he wasn't done yet, but they dismissed her as overly cautious. Months passed. One stormy night, the prison's security cameras flickered for just 20 seconds, a minor electrical glitch, or so they thought. When power returned, Adrian's cell was empty. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no traces of escape. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Interpol launched an international alert, but there were no leads. Adrian Voss had disappeared once again, and fear began to spread across Europe. Weeks later, a billionaire jeweler in Monaco was found dead, his Rolex missing, his body positioned exactly like Adrian's previous victims. It was his signature. The Rolex killer had returned. Interpol scrambled into action, reactivating its task force, while Sophia, now emotionally invested, took personal command of the hunt. She knew Adrian better than anyone, and she understood one terrifying truth. This wasn't just another spree, it was revenge. In his absence, documentaries, journalists, and police had turned his name into a myth, mocking his arrogance. He wanted to remind the world who he really was. His killings became bolder, filmed through stolen CCTV footage and leaked online as if he was controlling the narrative himself. He had become more than a criminal. He was a symbol of fear, the ghost of time that no one could stop. But Sophia was relentless. Using fragments of his past travel patterns and old contacts, she tracked him to a private island off the coast of Greece. When she arrived with her team, the villa was empty. Only a ticking Rolex was left on the table, engraved with words that sent chills down her spine. Time always wins. Interpol officially closed the case, listing Adrian Voss as presumed dead, though no body was ever found. But Sophia never believed it. Sometimes, she swore she could feel someone watching her in crowded airports, or see a flash of a familiar face reflected in a luxury watch display. The world moved on, yet whispers persisted in the dark corners of the internet. Rumors of new killings, new watches missing, and the same precision in execution. Whether Adrian Voss was alive or not didn't matter anymore. The legend of the Rolex killer had outlived the man himself, a chilling reminder that even when time runs out for everyone else, some monsters find a way to live forever in its shadow.